Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine stepping back, way back to 1873.
Right.
It's this era of huge industrial growth. Cities are just booming. But, well, they're facing massive challenges too.
Big challenges.
Fires, for one, a constant, terrifying threat. And buildings are going up so fast, people really needed materials that would, you know, last.
Exactly. And there was this one material, maybe not the first one you'd think of, that offered some pretty surprising solutions.
And that's what we're digging into today, right? The source from 1873.
Precisely. It's called soluble glass in all its applications. The author was a chemist and mineralogist, Dr. Lewis Feuchtwanger.
Soluble glass sounds a bit academic.
It does, doesn't it? But this book shows it was incredibly versatile, especially when you look at the problems they were trying to solve back then.
Yeah. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to get inside this 19th century text.
Yeah.
Pull out the key insights, the unexpected uses, what were their big worries, and how did this soluble glass thing help?
Exactly. We're seeing it through the lens of late 1800s engineering and, frankly, desperation sometimes.
Okay, let's start right there. Soluble glass. It feels like a contradiction. Glass is solid, right? Right. How can it be soluble? What is it?
That's a good question. Feuchtwanger defines it pretty simply. It's silicate of soda or silicate of potash or sometimes a mix.
Okay.
The key thing, he says, is the amount of alkali the soda or potash used when making it. Too much alkali and instead of hard glass, you get something that, well, dissolves in water. Liquid glass, basically.
And if Feuchtwanger wasn't just an observer, he was hands-on with this stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He claims right in the book he was the first to introduce it here in the U.S.
Wow.
and spent a lot of time experimenting, trying to figure out everything it could do. He really saw himself as its American champion.
You mentioned the big problems back then. Fire has to be high on that list. The source connects soluble glass directly to a major disaster, doesn't it?
It does. Right at the start, it talks about the Great Chicago Fire, October 1871.
A huge event.
Devastating. Wiped out something like a fifth of the city. Public buildings, churches, businesses, countless homes, especially those with wooden roofs. Just gone.
That must have put building safety, fire prevention, right at the top of everyone's agenda.
Absolutely. The source says it just spurred this huge interest in finding ways to build safer. How do we stop this from happening again?
And they had theories about how it spread so fast.
Yeah, they specifically mentioned sparks from things like church steeples. Being high up, embers could just scatter everywhere, landing on those flammable wooden roofs.
Okay, so enter soluble glass. This is the proposed solution.
It was a big one. The source, and even other publications like Scientific American, were arguing really strongly that if wood, especially shingles, exposed timber on buildings, had been saturated with soluble glass, it just wouldn't have caught fire like that. It was seen as a major preventative measure.
How does it actually work, though? Does it make wood completely non-flammable?
Not exactly non-flammable, but it changes how it burns. Treated wood, when hit by flame, would char and smolder. But crucially, it wouldn't burst into open flames. No scattering cinders, no firebrands spreading the fire block to block. That was the key.
So it contains the fire locally.
Right. They even described experiments holding treated wood blocks, sailcloth, paper over a gas lamp. They'd black and char, but not really ignite and burn away.
That's a pretty powerful selling point for cities built largely of wood. So fireproofing timber was a major application.
Oh, definitely. Feuchtwanger goes into detail about the process for fireproofing and preserving timber.
How did they do it?
It sounds quite involved. First, put the materials in steam boilers.
Okay.
Heated pretty hot, maybe 250 to 350 Fahrenheit, for several hours. Then dried. Then soaked in a weak solution of the liquid silicate, the soluble glass.
For how long?
A full 24 hours. Then they took it out, let it air dry. And this seems important, before it was totally dry.
Yeah.
They sprinkled it with a weak solution of chloride of calcium.
Chloride of calcium. Okay, what was that step for?
Good question. That helps to kind of fix the silica in the wood.
Yeah.
Makes it less soluble, precipitates it within the fibers so it doesn't just wash out easily.
Got it. Makes it more permanent.
Exactly. And this wasn't just theory. They listed all sorts of uses. Wooden roof shingles, especially near railroads, sparks from trains.
Makes sense.
Railroad sleepers, cross ties, timber for houses, ships, bridges, even telegraph poles, barrel staves. Lots of applications.
So more than just fire, it helped the wood last longer, too.
That was a big benefit, yes. Very effective against decay, dry rot, made the wood much more durable overall.
Any other side benefits?
Interestingly, yeah. They noted treating telegraph poles also made them better non-conductors of electricity.
Huh. And I think I saw something about combining it with creosote. Was that common?
That was a specific method, Krieg's method. It involved combining soluble glass with creosote carbolic acid.
Why do that?
The thinking was the acid would react with the soluble glass, helping precipitate that insoluble silica deep inside the wood.
Ah, another way to fix it.
Right. And the creosote itself obviously helped protect against rot. So it was kind of a double whammy approach tackling fire and decay together.
Okay, so wood decay was a big concern, but the source also talks about stone decay. We think of stone as permanent, but apparently not back then.
Well, even now it's not permanent. But
Oh.
yes, they were definitely grappling with it. Before we jump to stone, though, let's quickly revisit wood decay. What did they think caused it?
Right, good point. What was their theory?
They mentioned the obvious things, air, water, oxidation, but they put a lot of weight on something they called albumin in the wood sap.
Albumin, like in egg whites.
Yeah, similar idea, some kind of complex organic stuff in the sap. They figured once the tree was cut, this albumin started to decompose, acting like a ferment, kicking off the whole decay process.
Very interesting. So treatments aimed at that.
That was part of the idea. Methods like boiling wood or soaking it in running water were known to help, and they thought it was because that removed the albumin. Chemical treatments tried to neutralize it or make the wood resistant.
And some woods were naturally better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They mentioned locust and cedar as being naturally resistant to decay, and they linked that specifically to the nature of the albumin in those woods.
Okay, now stone. Why were these grand stone buildings crumbling?
Several reasons they identified. One was just physical water getting into pores, freezing, expanding, cracking the stone, the freeze-thaw cycle we still talk about.
Yeah.
Another was chemical atmospheric carbonic acid, basically a form of acid rain reacting with the stone.
Okay.
And fascinatingly, they also blamed a tiny little plant, a lichen called Lepra antiquitalis.
A plant eating stone, seriously.
That was the idea, eating away at the surface.
Yeah.
And soluble glass was actually used to fight this.
How?
They used it to refinish the surfaces of famous buildings in Europe that were showing decay. Places like the Louvre, Notre Dame in Paris, the House of the Parliament in London, the Vienna Cathedral Tower.
Wow. Coating them with soluble glass.
Essentially, yes, applying it to penetrate the pores and harden, creating a protective layer.
Did it always work perfectly?
Well, the source admits there were early problems. Sometimes rain would wash the soluble glass away before the alkali could fully neutralize and fix itself in the stone. But they figured out remedies, usually washing the treated surface with chloride of calcium or magnesium. That helped lock the silicate in place much better.
That Luxor obelisk example they mentioned really drives the point home about environment, doesn't it?
It's stark, yeah. Stood for, 40 centuries in Egypt's dry climate? Basically fine. Then just 40 years in damp Paris, and it's showing blanching, cracking. They blamed the moisture and those little cryptogamic plants, the lichens, thriving. Silicate treatment was meant to stop that kind of thing.
Okay, let's shift from protecting structures to actually building them. The source talks a lot about mortars, cements, even their history.
It really does. It starts with the basics.
Yeah.
Defining common mortar, just calcined limestone, water, and sand.
Right.
And then hydraulic cement. That's the key stuff that hardens even underwater or in damp air.
And they looked back to the Romans with admiration.
Definitely admiration for the results, Roman mortars lasting centuries. But also with a modern scientific eye, they knew the Romans didn't understand the chemistry.
Right.
They mentioned Pliny writing about Roman construction failures too, due to bad quality. They referenced Vitruvius talking about Roman methods. Picking the right limestone, slacking lime for 3 whole years, specific sand mixes, even state inspectors. Incredible practical knowledge.
But no science behind why it worked.
Exactly. The source contrasts that with later discoveries, Black figuring out carbonic acid, Margraf and Lavoisier working on gypsum. That gave the chemical understanding.
So modern science could speed things up.
That's what they note. With that understanding, they could make mortars that reach Roman strength in just a year or two, not centuries.
And the source dives into the different types of lime and cement available then.
It does. It categorizes them. Rich limes from pure limestone need dry air to harden by absorbing CO2. Poor limes with more impurities. And then the hydraulic limes.
Ones that sit underwater.
Right, because they contain silicates and aluminates that react chemically. They mention natural ones found in the U.S., like Rondout and Rosendale cement, and also artificially made ones, like Vicat, figuring out how to mix limestone and clay to get the same effect.
Portland cement gets a big mention too. Still a huge deal today.
Oh yeah, a detailed section on that. How it was made, usually chalk and river clay, like from the Thames.
What was the process?
Pretty complex. Mixing with water to a slurry, settling it out, drying it into cakes, burning those cakes really hot in a kiln to make clinker,
Clinker.
and then grinding that clinker down into the fine powder we know as cement.
Did they have different grades back then?
They did. They mentioned two main types: a heavier, slow-setting one that engineers liked for big structures,
Right.
and a lighter, quicker-setting one for plasterers. They talked about testing its strength with these little molded blocks, briquettes, and how Portland cement actually gets stronger setting underwater, which is unusual. They list what makes good cement: fine powder, sets firm, doesn't shrink or expand, uniform color, strong bonding, and they even warn about adulteration, mixing in cheaper stuff.
So where does the soluble glass come back in for actual building blocks? You mentioned artificial stone.
Yes, this was another major use. The soluble glass acts as the binder. It's the glue, essentially, holding the stone together.
What kind of stone?
Well, artificial stone, they have various recipes using sand, chalk, clay, mix it up, sometimes use pressure or heat, and then the soluble glass binds it all as it hardens, often finished with those chloride washes again, calcium or iron chloride, to make the bond permanent.
Were people actually building things with this artificial stone?
Oh, yes. They cite specific recipes from Siemens for different kinds: white stone, monuments, regular building blocks. They mention huge barracks built in Vienna using it.
Yeah.
And remember the Vienna Cathedral Tower repair. That also used this artificial stone. Plus, methods for making artificial sandstone, or just mixing chalk and alkaline silicates to get a hard, cement-like material.
Okay, from building blocks to paint. The source talks about using soluble glass in paints and coatings, too.
It does. Again, the soluble glass acts as the binder, but this time for pigments. Lets you paint onto wood, stone, metal, even glass and porcelain.
How did it work on stone walls, like for frescoes?
You'd first treat the porous stone, or limestone, with diluted soluble glass. It soaks in, hardens, seals the surface, makes it almost glassy.
An impervious surface.
Exactly. Perfect base for fresco painting. But, and this is crucial, you could only use mineral-based pigments.
Why is that?
Because the soluble glass is alkaline. It would chemically react with and destroy any organic colors.
So you had to know your chemistry.
You did. They mention this technique, water glass frescoes, being used on big buildings, the one in Washington Capitol, museums in Berlin and Munich.
What kind of mineral colors worked?
They list examples. Mix soluble glass with chalk for white, add pigments like chromate of zinc for yellow, ultramarine for blue, oxide of chromium for green, cinnabar for red, stuff like that.
And colors to avoid?
Yeah, they specifically warn against things like Prussian blue or chromate of lead. The alkali just ruins them.
What about painting on metal? Did it protect it?
That was the idea. It apparently adhered well to iron, zinc, brass, formed a coating to protect against air and water, stop rust and corrosion.
Any specific uses?
They mentioned painting stoves with soluble glass mixed with black oxide of manganese. The heat from the stove was thought to help fuse this coating, making it durable and preventing the metal from scaling up.
And even on glass and porcelain. Seems a bit niche.
Maybe, but they had uses. Coating plate glass to make it opaque, mixing it with bright white for a milky look. If you heated these coatings, you could get enamel-like surfaces.
For decoration.
Sometimes, like for making transparencies or colored effects on church windows. Again, using those stable mineral colors like ultramarine or oxide of chromium that could handle the heat and the alkali.
And durable exterior coatings, too. You mentioned lighthouses.
Right. A practical, tough coating for rough brick walls, gray or brick-colored. The U.S. government supposedly used it on lighthouses.
What was in it?
Pretty simple. Rosendale cement, sand, and soluble glass. The key trick in applying it was to wet the brick wall thoroughly first.
Why?
So the porous brick wouldn't suck all the water out of the coating mix too fast. Gave the soluble glass time to set properly and bond everything into a strong, waterproof layer.
Okay, we've hit the big ones. Fireproofing, decay, building materials, paint. But the source goes into some really, really unexpected territory, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This is where you just see the sheer range of things Feuchtwanger and others were trying with this stuff. It's kind of mind-boggling.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, specialized cements for tiny repairs.
Such as?
Mending plaster molds for dentists.
No way.
Yes. Or cementing delicate things like parchment, slate, marble pieces together. Recipes for fixing cracks in stoves using iron powder mixed with soluble glass. A super complex cement recipe for cisterns involving plaster of Paris, Glober salts, clay, lime, soluble glass, and calcium chloride. Strong cements for patching iron pipes using iron turnings, sal ammonia, sulfur. it goes on.
Using the same base stuff to fix teeth molds and leaky cast iron pipes, that's versatility. What about that aquarium cement?
That's a great one. Designed specifically to be totally waterproof and not crack.
What was in it?
Dry soluble glass powder, chalk, sand made into a paste with the liquid stuff, then treated with calcium chloride solution and even weak hydrofluoric acid.
Wow.
Made it perfect not just for fish tanks, but lining brewery tanks, malt houses, cellars, anywhere needing a tough waterproof seal.
Could you just use it like regular glue?
Apparently so. The source says it was sold as mucilage, used for gluing wood, paper, making pasteboard like an early version of cardboard, whose bookbinders use it as paste.
Leather, too?
They mentioned it could work on leather, but maybe not if the leather needed to bend a lot. Might crack.
Glazing pots and pans. Was that safe for food?
That was the claim. They had processes for glazing iron and stoneware, using silicate solutions mixed with lime water, powdered quartz, potash, saltpeter. Applied it, heated it, supposedly made a hard, acid-resistant surface for cooking.
Okay, this one seems totally random. Manure for grapevines.
Right, out of left field. But the source claims applying dry silicate of soda near grapevine roots, sometimes with phosphate of lime, helped them.
Helped how?
Thicker vines, bigger grapes, apparently. Maybe they thought the silica acted as a nutrient or just strengthened the plant structure somehow. It's hard to say for sure.
And lubrication. How does soluble glass lubricate anything?
Well, they mixed it with other things. There's a recipe for an adhesive lubricator with black lead, lime, borax sulfate, linseed oil, and concentrated soluble glass.
Okay.
And another for a heat-resistant or refractory cement that also acted as a lubricant. That one had silica, asbestos, graphite, soapstone, and soluble glass, used for things like locomotive journals, train axles, hot, heavy-duty uses.
Seal in barrels makes a lot of sense, though. Very practical.
Extremely practical. Lining barrels for oil, flour preventing mustiness in the flour. Sealing the outside of barrels, too, with a silicated cement.
To stop leaks.
Exactly. Made them impervious to air and liquids. Essential for shipping valuable stuff like spirits, oil, lard, butter without loss.
Cleaning uses, too.
Yep. Degreasing raw wool. And cleaning engine waste that oily cotton or wool used to wipe down machinery. Maybe to reuse it.
And last but not least, indelible ink.
Right at the end, yes. Recipes using soluble glass as the binder, lampblack or decomposed leather for black ink, cochineal decoction for red ink.
And the selling point was?
Resistance.
Yeah.
They claimed these inks resisted chlorine, acids, made them permanent, hard to tamper with.
Wow. Okay, just stepping back for a second. We've gone through this one single text from 1873.
We have.
And the picture it paints of soluble glass is just huge.
Astonishing, isn't it? From fireproofing cities, preserving monuments, fixing teeth molds, fertilizing grapes, lubricating trains, making ink and glue. It was everywhere.
It really gives you this incredible window into the material science and the practical problem-solving mindset of that time.
Absolutely. The ingenuity in taking this one fairly simple chemical compound and adapting it to solve so many different pressing problems, durability, protection, construction, in that specific moment of intense growth and change.
And it's striking how many of those core problems are still relevant for us today, fire safety, building longevity, finding durable, cost-effective materials.
Definitely makes you appreciate how people tackle these fundamental issues with the knowledge and materials they had. Real innovation.
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway for you listening to this? If one source from 1873 shows this much versatility for soluble glass,
it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other seemingly simple materials in the past might hold untapped potential, or at least offer lessons for tackling modern challenges.
Or maybe the key isn't always finding brand new miracle materials.
Perhaps not. Maybe it's more about looking at what we already have, the known stuff, and finding those clever, creative ways to combine and apply them, just like Feuchtwanger and his contemporaries were doing with soluble glass nearly 150 years ago.